The colony world Delvar 3 lay in uneasy silence, the kind that makes every breath feel heavy and every shadow suspicious. Commander Lyra Vance stood on the cracked observation deck, eyes scanning the darkened skies above the settlement. The thick atmosphere, usually filled with the gentle hum of transport ships and mining drones, was now eerily still. No signals from the outside world had come through for days, no messages from Earth, no updates from the unified Terran command, only a cold void where hope used to live. Around her, the settlers prepared for the worst. Men and women who once lived peaceful lives as miners, farmers, and engineers had taken up arms with whatever they could find: old rifles, mining lasers, rusted mechs patched together from scraps, and they waited, knowing the Karnox Empire would soon arrive. The Karnox were ruthless, their living weapons bred for war, their armies unstoppable and merciless. For months, they had closed in on Delvar 3, cutting off supply lines, destroying communication arrays, and isolating the colony like a trap snapping shut. The last transmission from the Terran command was cold and clear. No reinforcements. Hold as long as you can. Lyra had heard those words before, but this time they felt like a sentence passed down from a distant judge who had already decided their fate. She paced the deck, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world into a twilight that seemed deeper than natural. Her people were frightened but resolute, their eyes reflecting the glow of hastily set fires and the flicker of distant searchlights combing the hills for enemy movement. Then, just as the first star appeared in the darkening sky, a crackling burst of static broke through the silence on the colony's ancient comms console. Lyra froze, heart pounding as she leaned forward. The signal was faint, corrupted by noise, but unmistakably human. It was a code she had not heard in years-old Morse-like bursts that no modern ship should use anymore. She adjusted the frequency, trying to clear the interference. "This is Commander Vance of Delvar 3. "Identify yourself," she whispered into the microphone, barely daring to hope. The response came, low and steady, voice distorted but clear. "ISS Vindicator. Earth Fleet. We're en route." The room around her seemed to hold its breath as disbelief spread like wildfire. The Earth Fleet had been disbanded long ago, broken apart by political battles and forgotten wars. Their ships were legends, tales told in hushed tones about the days when humanities might rule the stars. No one expected them to return, not now, not here. Yet, the signal was real. Lyra's fingers trembled as she reached for the holomap, eyes searching the deep space beyond the colony's orbit. There, just on the edge of sensor range, faint blips appeared, shadows against the void, massive and angular. They were the ships from Stories, ancient vessels covered in scars and battle-worn armor. The people of Delvar 3 gathered at the comm station, whispers of hope beginning to bloom like fragile flowers in winter. But there was no time for celebration. The Karnox swarms would arrive within hours, and only a miracle could save them now. Lyra turned from the window, her mind racing as the first distant flashes of enemy weapon fire lit the horizon. The silence before the storm was over. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? The hours following the unexpected transmission felt like a nightmare made real for Commander Lyra Vance and the people of Delvar 3 as the alien Karnox Empire tightened its grip on the settlement with relentless force, their monstrous ships blotting out the stars and casting an oppressive shadow across the planet's surface. The colony's defenders, once mere farmers, miners, and engineers, scrambled to transform their tools and equipment into weapons, their hands shaking but their hearts set on survival. Makeshift barricades were raised along dirt roads, old mining lasers were hurriedly retrofitted to fire in bursts, and rusty exosuits groaned as volunteers slipped inside to face a foe unlike anything they had seen before. Through the thickening smog and ash of burning outposts, the rhythmic thud of Karnox dropships filled the air, and the sickly green light of alien energy. Weapons sliced through the gloom. Commander Lyra moved among her people, offering steady commands, her voice the anchor in the storm of fear and chaos. Yet, despite the desperation, a strange unease settled in her chest. The distress signals from Delvar 3 had gone unanswered for so long that the faint hope sparked by the mysterious message from the ISS Vindicator felt almost like a cruel joke. Could it be a trap? A desperate ploy by the Karnoks to lure the colony into a false sense of security before annihilation? Then, just as the first wave of Karnok's biosoldiers hit the perimeter, the sky tore open with a thunderous roar, unlike any thunderstorm Delvar III had ever known. Out of a shimmering rip in space appeared colossal ships, their shapes angular and harsh against the night sky, surfaces scarred with countless battles, and weapons arrays glowing with cold blue energy. The old emblems on their hulls caught the light of explosions, revealing the insignia of Earth's legendary First Fleet, the Black Sun, long thought lost to history and the passage of time. The settlers stared upward, eyes wide with disbelief, and something like hope swelling inside their chests. No one had believed those ships still flew, hidden for decades after Earth's political wars shattered the fleet. The humans had given up hope of rescue, yet here they were, breaking through the Karnok's blockade like ghosts from the stars. A crackling voice echoed over open comm channels, firm and commanding, but edged with exhaustion. This is Admiral Rourke of the ISS Vindicator. Commander Vance, your fight is not over. Stand down your defenses. We are taking command of the battle. The words sliced through the tension like a blade, but Lyra was cautious. Identify yourself fully. Why now? Why come when we thought you were gone? She demanded, her voice steady but laced with disbelief. Because we never left, Rourke answered grimly. We were forced into the shadows, hiding in Karnok's space, learning their secrets, striking where they least expected. We are Earth's deadliest fleet, and we have returned to end this war. Meanwhile, the Karnok's forces recoiled, their bioengineered ships and monstrous soldiers faltering as the Vindicator and its sister ships unleashed torrents of kinetic fire and plasma that sliced through alien armor like paper. Delvar III's defenders watched in awe as the ancient war machines, powered by technology older than most had believed possible, tore apart the enemy with precision and brutal efficiency. The Karnoks, masters of genetic warfare and overwhelming numbers, found themselves pushed back by sheer human grit and the cold steel of ships born in humanity's darkest days. Yet beneath the triumph, Lyra sensed something deeper. The First Fleet's weapons lacked the advanced AI and quantum systems that newer Terran vessels used. Instead, they relied on brute force and cunning, a style of warfare from a time when men and women made the difference more than machines. When she finally spoke with Admiral Rourke directly, he revealed a truth that chilled her. His fleet had not simply been hiding to survive, but had been waging a silent war within the Karnok's heartlands, striking at their supply lines, sabotaging their genetic labs, and gathering intelligence that no modern fleet could have dared to collect. Their silence was a strategy born from necessity and pain. But the Karnoks had grown stronger. They had evolved their living weapons and unleashed new horrors, the deadliest of which was a creature called the Voidhorn, a massive, telepathic beast bred to hunt and destroy human fighters. As the First Fleet engaged the alien ships in orbit, the Voidhorn descended on Delvar III itself, forcing Lyra and her best soldiers into a desperate fight for survival on the ground. Armed with only scavenged weapons and raw determination, they faced the beast in the shadow of crumbling ruins and scorched forests, using guerrilla tactics and clever traps to stall the creature's advance. Each strike was a gamble. The Voidhorn adapted quickly, its mind connected to a vast hive network that controlled the Karnok's forces, making the battle a test not only of strength but of will and cunning. The settlers who had once doubted whether help would ever come now realized that salvation had arrived in a form harsher and more terrifying than they could have imagined. This fleet from Earth did not come with open hands. They came as warriors reborn from the ashes of forgotten wars, carrying the weight of a long-forgotten promise to defend humanity at any cost. And as the first brutal skirmishes gave way to a full-scale battle in the skies and on the ground, Commander Lyra Vance knew the fight was far from over. The Karnoks would not yield easily, and the shadows that hid Earth's deadliest fleet held secrets that could change the fate of not just Delvar III, but the entire galaxy. The battle for Delvar III exploded into chaos as the ancient but fearsome Earth fleet unleashed its power against the relentless Karnoks invaders. a spectacle of destruction that left the colony's defenders breathless, and the alien forces scrambling to respond. Commander Lyra Vance watched from the command center as massive dreadnoughts, their hulls scarred by countless battles yet gleaming with deadly intent, tore through Karnak's ships with a savage precision that seemed almost brutal in its efficiency. These vessels did not rely on the advanced quantum systems or sleek AI controls of modern ships. Instead, their captains wielded raw experience and instinct, firing kinetic rods that tore through bioorganic armor and railguns that shattered living hulls with thunderous impact. The sky above Delvar 3 was a storm of fire and steel, the Karnak's fleet's usually confident formations breaking apart under the relentless assault. The enemy's bioships, grotesque blends of living flesh and technology, writhed and screamed as they were ripped apart, their shields flickering and collapsing under the withering barrage. On the ground, Lyra and her fighters pressed their advantage, using the distraction above to push back Karnak's troops, who had hoped to overwhelm the colony's defenses with sheer numbers. Yet, the humans could not shake a growing unease. The First Fleet's tactics, though devastating, were old-fashioned, brutal, direct, and without mercy. It was clear these warriors had been forged in a different era, when war was fought with grit and sacrifice rather than diplomacy and high-tech finesse. When Lyra finally managed to speak with Admiral Rourke aboard the ISS Vindicator, she found a man hardened by years in the shadows, his voice steady but tinged with weariness as he revealed the true cost of their mission. The First Fleet had not simply returned to save Delvar 3. They had been waging a silent war deep inside Karnak's territory, striking at the enemy's heart where no other Terran force dared to tread. They had sacrificed everything to learn the Karnak's weaknesses, and now their brutal style of combat was their greatest weapon. But the Karnaks had changed. The new horrors they unleashed were unlike anything Lyra's people had faced before. Among them was the Voidhorn, a massive telepathic beast bred to hunt humans with terrifying intelligence and strength. As the fleet rained destruction from orbit, the Voidhorn descended on the colony itself, a shadow of death stalking the ruins and forests. Lyra led a small squad in an effort to trap the creature, their weapons firing in desperate bursts as the ground shook beneath its massive steps. The battle was fierce and close, with human ingenuity tested against an enemy that seemed almost unstoppable. Yet, the defenders learned quickly, exploiting the Voidhorn's connection to the Karnak's hive mind to disrupt its control and weaken its attacks. Meanwhile, the fleet's relentless pressure forced the Karnaks to withdraw many of their ships to defend their bases, giving the colony a precious breathing space. The settlers of Delvar 3 watched as the Black Sun ships, long thought lost, fought with a savage determination, their captains' commands echoing across comm channels as they tore through enemy formations. For the first time in years, hope flickered like a beacon in the darkness. But even in victory, the cost was clear. The First Fleet's ancient ships were battered and their ammunition was running low. The Karnaks were regrouping and preparing a counterstrike that promised to be even more devastating. As Lyra and Rourke prepared for what might be the final battle for Delvar 3, they knew the fight would test every ounce of human courage and resolve. The sky belonged to Earth now, but the war for the colony and humanity's future was far from over. The uneasy quiet that followed the fierce battle over Delvar 3 was a fragile veil stretched thin over a brewing storm, as Commander Lyra Vance listened closely to Admiral Rourke's steady voice explaining the dark truths behind the First Fleet's long absence and the shadows in which they had fought for decades, a story that shook her very understanding of the war she was embroiled in. Rourke revealed that when the Karnaks first launched their savage campaigns against humanity centuries ago, the First Fleet had been Earth's pride and shield until political strife fractured the command and left those ships stranded far from home. Refusing to surrender, the fleet vanished into Karnak's controlled space, becoming ghost warriors who operated from the darkness, waging a covert war that was more deadly and more desperate than any open battle. They struck hard and fast, sabotaging supply lines, destroying genetic labs where the Karnaks bred their bioweapons, and cutting communication nodes to cripple the enemy from within. This was a war fought with stealth and shadows, where survival depended on cunning and cruelty as much as firepower. As Lyra absorbed the grim history, she realized the cost the fleet had paid: countless ships lost, crews broken, and an unending burden to stay hidden lest the Karnaks unleash vengeance beyond anything the colony had seen. But the Karnaks had not stood still. Their evolution was relentless, and their new bioengineered horrors surpassed even the worst terrors Lyra had faced. Among these was the Voidhorn, a massive telepathic predator whose mind was linked to the Karnak's hive network, allowing it to control swarms of creatures and coordinate attacks with terrifying precision. The beast was designed not only to kill but to break the will of humanity, hunting down soldiers and civilians alike with a cold intelligence that made it nearly unstoppable. With the Karnaks preparing to launch a full system cleansing of Delver 3, Rourke made a grim promise. The First Fleet would control the skies, but the colony's defenders had to hold the ground, stop the Voidhorn, and buy the time needed to break the enemy's grip. The war in the shadows was coming to light, and the fate of the colony hung on a knife's edge. Lyra gathered her best fighters, scarred veterans, and quick learners alike, and prepared for a desperate gambit. They would face the Voidhorn in the twisted forests and ruined cities where it hunted, using every trap, every trick, and every ounce of courage they had. The creatures they faced were monstrous and relentless, but the humans adapted quickly, exploiting terrain, deploying signal jammers to disrupt the hive mind, and coordinating attacks that pushed the creature back. On the orbital front, the First Fleet engaged Karnak's reinforcements, their battle cries ringing through the void as they fought with the fury of a species unwilling to be broken. Yet, even as victories piled up, the cost was high. Every strike left the fleet weaker, every victory a reminder of the sacrifices made. In the darkness between stars and shadows on the ground, humanity found a new strength, a determination forged in secrecy and shadow, unyielding even when hope seemed lost. As the war raged in the shadows, Commander Lyra understood that this was more than a battle for a single colony. It was a fight for the soul of humanity, and the ghosts from the stars would not let them fall. The sky over Delvar 3 burned with a cruel, fiery glow as the Karnaks launched their fiercest assault yet, an overwhelming wave of bioengineered terror that shattered the fragile calm the humans had fought so hard to build, and Commander Lyra Vance felt the weight of every soul depending on her. As the colony's defenses crumbled piece by piece beneath the enemy's relentless fury. Despite the heroic efforts of the Earth's First Fleet in orbit, tearing through Karnak's warships with brutal precision, the alien forces had adapted swiftly, flooding the planet with fresh waves of monstrous soldiers and terrifying creatures that clawed through barricades and swarmed over ruin. Buildings with savage hunger. The Voidhorn, that terrible telepathic beast, had returned with reinforcements of smaller, equally deadly creatures, hunting the colony's defenders with calculated intelligence that made every step outside safety a gamble with death. Lyra and her fighters moved through the burning streets like shadows, firing into the darkness, setting traps, and falling back only when forced, but the Karnak's numbers were endless, and their rage unstoppable. The ground shook with explosions, and fires turned the night into a hellscape where hope seemed to wither under the scorching heat. Yet, even as the colony began to fall, a fierce resolve blazed in the hearts of the defenders. Lyra knew the First Fleet's presence was the only reason Delvar 3 still breathed, and with their support, she orchestrated a desperate plan to strike at the Karnak's command center buried deep beneath the planet's surface, an ancient facility that housed the nerve center of their operations and the genetic labs where the horrors were born. The mission was perilous. The team had to navigate through war-torn ruins, evade patrols of alien biobeasts, and face the Voidhorn itself in a final confrontation that would decide the fate of the colony. As they moved through the darkness, the air thick with smoke and tension, Lyra felt the weight of history pressing down the sacrifices of the First Fleet, the bravery of her people, and the unyielding spirit that refused to let humanity fade into the void. The assault on the command center was brutal and close, with humans and Karnaks clashing in a deadly dance of fire and steel. Explosions rocked the tunnels, alarms blared, and the terrifying cries of the Voidhorn echoed through the corridors as it hunted the intruders with ruthless precision. But the defenders fought with desperate fury, their weapons blazing, their minds focused on one goal: to destroy the heart of the enemy's power and end the nightmare that had consumed their world. When the final explosion shattered the command center, the shockwave rolled through the tunnels, toppling walls and severing the link between the Karnak's hive mind and their creatures on the surface. The Voidhorn's cries turned to confused rage before fading into silence. Above ground, the Karnak's forces faltered, their coordination breaking apart like shattered glass. The First Fleet seized the moment, pressing their attack and driving the alien invaders back into retreat. As the fires died down and the smoke cleared, the survivors of Delvar III emerged from their shelters, battered but alive, faces marked by exhaustion and relief. Lyra stood among them, her eyes reflecting the flames still burning in the distance, knowing this was only the beginning of a long fight to reclaim their world. The colony had fallen and risen from fire, its spirit forged stronger than ever, while the stars above held the promise of a future where humanity's deadliest fleet stood ready to face whatever darkness might come next. The planet Delvar III lay scarred but unbroken under a sky still streaked with smoke and the fading fires of war, and amid the ruins stood Commander Lyra Vance, her eyes sharp and steady as she surveyed the battered landscape where humanity had refused to bow to the relentless Karnak's empire, a force that seemed unstoppable yet was now beginning to falter against the unyielding spirit of the settlers and the ancient fleet that had returned from the shadows to reclaim their place among the stars. The destruction around her was staggering: collapsed buildings, shattered vehicles, craters gouged deep into the earth, but so too was the courage of the people who had survived the nightmare and now prepared to rebuild, not just their homes, but their hope and their will to fight on. Lyra had learned that surrender was a word erased from their vocabulary. It was a strength born from countless hardships and the knowledge that humanity's future was at stake, far beyond this single world. The First Fleet ships hung low in orbit, their battered hulls a testament to battles fought and won, their crews restless but resolute, aware that their victory was fragile and that the Karnaks would not relent. Communications from Earth had resumed, bringing news of reinforcements and renewed support, but the war was far from over. Below, the survivors trained and prepared, forging alliances between miners, engineers, soldiers, and civilians who had all been transformed by the brutal trials they faced. They shared stories of loss and hope, of battles where they had stared death in the face and chosen to fight on. The colony's engineers worked tirelessly, repairing weapons, building defenses, and scavenging parts from destroyed Karnak's machines to strengthen their position. Children who had grown up in the shadows of war learned to handle rifles and drones, their innocence replaced by a fierce determination to protect their home and those they loved. Lyra moved among them like a beacon of strength, her presence inspiring confidence even in the darkest hours. Yet, she knew the Karnaks were adapting too, their hive mind reassembling, their bioweapons mutating to counter human tactics, their war cries echoing from distant worlds as fresh fleets prepared to descend. Intelligence reports warned of a massive Karnaks offensive aimed at crushing Delvar III once and for all, a final blow to snuff out the flickering light of human resistance. But humanity had changed. The survivors of Delvar III were no longer victims. They were warriors molded by fire and loss, united by a cause greater than themselves. When the enemy fleet finally appeared on the horizon, vast and terrifying, the First Fleet rose to meet them, their ancient ships roaring back to life with engines that hummed like thunder. The battle that followed was brutal and unforgiving, a clash of steel, fire, and unbreakable will. Amidst the chaos, Lyra led daring ground raids against Karnak supply lines and biolabs, striking at the enemy's heart with precision and courage that inspired her people to push beyond their limits. The colony's defenders fought with the knowledge that surrender meant annihilation, that their survival was a beacon for all humanity struggling against darkness in the galaxy. As the war stretched on, alliances were forged not just among humans, but with other species who had suffered under the Karnak's yoke, creating a united front that stood taller than any single fleet or colony. The legend of the First Fleet and the bravery of Delvar III's people spread across star systems, a rallying cry that stirred hope and resistance in the hearts of the oppressed. Even when the Karnaks unleashed their deadliest new weapons, monstrous machines, and genetically twisted beasts designed to break human morale, the defenders held firm, adapting their tactics and pushing forward with a determination that seemed impossible. Lyra's leadership was tested time and again, her decisions carrying the weight of countless lives, but she never wavered. She knew humanity didn't yield, it fought, endured, and rose. As the stars burned cold above and the fires of battle faded, Delvar III stood as a symbol of that spirit, scarred but alive, broken but unbowed, a testament that even in the darkest hour, humanity's light would never be extinguished. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, victory felt within reach. The final battle for Delvar III unfolded beneath a bruised sky that bore the scars of countless clashes, the planet's battered surface alive with the thunderous roar of engines, the clash of weapons, and the unyielding will of a species fighting not just for survival but for the right to claim the stars as their own. Commander Lyra Vance stood resolute amidst the chaos, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the Karnock's fleet, vast and menacing, spread like a dark storm ready to crush the last flicker of human resistance. Yet behind her, the Earth's deadliest fleet, ancient, relentless, and forged in wars long forgotten, prepared to strike with the fury of 1,000 suns, their battered ships humming with a fierce determination to bring humanity's fight to a victorious end. The battle erupted with a force that shook the heavens as dreadnoughts and bioorganic monstrosities collided, a storm of fire and metal that sent shockwaves through space and tore at the fragile piece of Delvar III's battered skies. Every shot fired, every explosion lit the night with a deadly dance of light and shadow, and the air trembled with the weight of a fight that meant more than a single colony's fate. It was a war for Earth's future among the stars. Lyra led her ground forces through shattered cities and burning forests, where every corner held the danger of Karnock's hunters or sudden attacks, her voice calm and commanding as she directed her fighters to hold key positions, rescue civilians, and strike at enemy weak points with precision born of hard-earned experience. Above, the First Fleet's captains screamed orders, their decades-old battle tactics blending with the desperate innovation of their crews as they unleashed devastating barrages that tore apart Karnock's capital ships and cut through the night sky like lightning, a thunderous reminder that Earth's legacy was alive and unyielding. Yet the Karnocks were cunning, deploying terrifying new weapons that fused organic life and machine, their monstrous forms evolving mid-battle to counter human strategies and strike fear deep into the hearts of even the bravest defenders. The Voidhorn returned, larger and more terrifying than ever, its telepathic roar shaking the minds of soldiers and commanders alike. But Lyra and her team had prepared, using jammers and decoys to sever its link to the hive mind, turning the beast's strength into a vulnerability that the humans exploited with deadly efficiency. The tide of battle ebbed and flowed like a raging sea, with moments of crushing loss and unexpected triumphs. But through it all, humanity's determination burned brighter than any weapon or shield, a fierce flame that refused to be snuffed out. The colony's people, battered but unbroken, fought alongside the veterans of the First Fleet, their unity a symbol of what humanity could achieve when standing together against the darkness. As the war reached its climax, Lyra faced the ultimate choice: a daring assault on the Karnock's command flagship, a massive biomechanical fortress hovering ominously above the planet, controlling the remaining forces and threatening to crush the last human stronghold. With a handpicked squad and the support of the fleet, she launched the strike that would decide the fate of Delvar III, and perhaps all humanity. The assault was brutal and close, with every second a battle for life or death. Inside the alien ship, Lyra confronted horrors born of twisted science and savage instinct, yet her resolve never faltered. Using every skill and every ally she had, she pushed deeper until the command core was within reach, planting charges that would cripple the enemy's command and sever the Karnock's control. The countdown began as alarms blared and the ship shook violently, and Lyra raced to escape as the fortress erupted in a cataclysmic explosion that lit the skies with a blaze of fire and shattered Karnock's resistance forever. As silence finally fell over Delvar III, the battered survivors looked up at a sky slowly clearing of smoke and fire, where the stars shone brighter than ever, a reminder that this war, brutal and unrelenting, had ended not with surrender, but with the roar of victory. Earth's deadliest fleet had returned, not just as ghosts from the past, but as the guardians of humanity's future, and the sky belonged to Earth once more. The scars on Delvar 3 would heal, new colonies would rise, and the story of courage, sacrifice, and unyielding hope would be told across the galaxy, a testament to a species that refused to yield even when all seemed lost.